Congratulations on becoming a peer review panelist. You are now part of the solution. This video will take you through a peer review case. This is not a real case, and the participants are actors, although the case may be like some you may review. Of course, the details of every case are confidential, and we would never videotape a real case. As a peer review panelist, you may be making a decision about whether or not someone gets his or her job back. Exercise this responsibility wisely. Base your decision on the facts presented. And remember, all details of every case are strictly confidential and should never be discussed with anyone outside your meeting. Watch closely to see how the panelist and facilitator conduct this review.
Okay, you've heard the tape. Now take a minute to look over the appeal form and familiarize yourself with the details of why this person requested a panel. You'll see Bob, a bartender for 2 years, was terminated for not showing up and not calling. Now, he's asking for his job back and would like back pay for wages lost. Are there any questions?
How have similar cases been handled? And are there any precedents?
Well, as a matter of fact, I have that information here. Yes, there have been a few incidents in this restaurant. 2 years ago, a long-term employee had 3 no-calls and no-shows and was not terminated. And 6 months ago, another employee was termed for a no-call, no-show.
What is the company policy on no calls, no shows?
Attendance guidelines are outlined in the employee handbook, and I've marked that.
If you are unable to report to work because of illness or another valid reason, be sure to notify your manager before your scheduled shift begins. Remember, your job is important and your manager will need a reasonable amount of time to arrange for someone to take your place.
Is there anything else? Okay, I'll bring in Bob.
Nice to meet you, Bob.
Nice to meet you.
This is Kira, a server at our Winter Park store.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Kira.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, Bob, you've met everyone. Now I think we're going to begin. We've read your appeal, but why don't you tell us why you're here?
Well, I feel like I shouldn't have been fired. It's like this. I was on my way to work one day, and I got in a traffic accident. It wasn't my fault. Some guy ran a stoplight. So the cops got there, and come to find out there's an outstanding ticket on my license, and they arrested me right there. And they wouldn't let me go until I paid this ticket. And they would only let me make 1 call, so I called my mom. I didn't have the money, so she came, and we went down and paid the ticket. And then right when I got home, I called work. You know, I couldn't even pick up Jimmy, one of the kitchen guys, to take him to work because of this.
Why didn't you tell your mom to call the restaurant for you when you called her?
She was kind of freaked out about the car and the accident. And it was her car, and she didn't want it being left in that neighborhood.
What time were you scheduled to work?
At 6 o'clock.
What time did you call in?
Right when I got home, around 8 o'clock.
What time did the accident happen?
I gave her a copy of the accident report.
The police report says 5:15.
Did you explain everything to your manager?
Yeah, he didn't want to listen. He said no call, no show, no job.
What about Jimmy? Did you call him to tell him you couldn't pick him up?
I called Jimmy right before the police came, and they pulled up right as I was hanging up, and then they wouldn't let me make any other phone calls except to my mom. I was lucky they let me do that. Then they just made me sit there right by my car.
Did you ask Jimmy to tell your manager what happened?
No, I thought that I would be able to make more calls.
Did you know you were going to be fired for a no-show, no-call?
Well, that's why I called.
Have you ever been told what would happen if you couldn't make it into work?
Well, the gym, our old manager, we could just call in. Everyone was allowed, 1 absence if there was something major that happened beyond our control or emergency.
Okay, well, that was with your previous manager. What about now?
Well, George, he's been with the store now for about 8 months. He's really strict. But I called. That's what I was supposed to do.
Are there any other questions? Well, Bob, is there anything else that you'd like the panel to know about your case?
I like tending bar at Red Lobster, and I'm really good at it. Ask my guests, ask anyone. And I really want my job back. You know, I've got bills piling up since the accident, and I need the job. I got in an accident, it wasn't my fault.
The panel has made a list of facts and is reviewing them with the facilitator.
So the facts are,
Well, Bob was in an accident on his way to work at 5:15. He then called Jimmy and told him he couldn't pick him up. Bob was arrested by the police and he called his mom. He called work at 8 o'clock when he had returned home. The previous manager did allow this type of behavior. Bob's a good worker.
well, that's not really a fact. We don't have any proof of that except his opinion. So it might be a little premature to decide that now.
He was scheduled at 6 and called at 8 o'clock.
I made a note that he wasn't up to uniform standard. He was wearing an earring.
Now remember, Bob wasn't terminated for not adhering to uniform standards. And technically, since he's not at work, he doesn't have to appear in uniform. So let's try to stick to facts relevant to the case. Anything else?
Let's bring in the next witness.
The next witness has been brought in. Remember, all witnesses leave the room after stating their case. Only one witness appears before the panel at a time. George, the general manager who terminated Bob, has been introduced to the panel and is ready to tell his side of the situation.
Here's Bob's file, George. Why don't you tell the panel what happened?
Well, let's see. Bob was scheduled to work at 5:45 and called at 9:30 to say that he wouldn't be in, but he never actually talked to me directly. I think he asked the hostess, Lisa, to tell me that he'd gotten arrested and that he would be in the next day for his shift.
Has he ever not shown up before?
Just let him finish. You'll have a chance to ask questions later.
Yes, let's see, I have some counseling slips here. About 2 months ago, he was an hour late. He said he misread the schedule, so I gave him a verbal warning. Then about a month ago, I think it was March 14th. Yeah, here it is. He didn't call, and he didn't show, so I wrote him up. He said that he'd been stopped for expired tags, and the police wouldn't let him drive his car. We told him that he still could have called, but he didn't call until the next day. I told him if that happened again, that he would be terminated.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Is he late often?
Well, I've only documented these 2 incidents, but Bob is always 5 to 10 minutes late, and he has more excuses than anyone I've ever heard.
Did you make it clear that if this happened again, that he would be fired?
Oh, I put it in writing, and he signed it. It was very clear.
Well, did he explain to you why he didn't call or show this time?
Well, the next day when he came in, he was 10 minutes late as usual, and I called him into the office and I told him he was terminated. He tried to give me some excuse about being in an accident and getting arrested, but I told him he had been warned, and I had told him before that he had to call and talk directly to a manager. So I was tired of hearing it, and I really had no choice.
How long have you been a GM at the store?
I've been a GM here for 8 months, but I've been a general manager for 3 years, and I've been with Red Lobster for 7 years.
How have other no-calls, no-shows been handled in your restaurant?
Well, before I came, I think the other GM was a little more lenient about it. And I understand that things happen, but they need to call right away and let me or another manager know. I mean, after all, we depend on them, and it's only fair to the other employees.
Have you communicated this to all of your employees?
Plenty of times. I made it very clear that I handle things differently than the other general manager.
But Bob did call. He spoke to Lisa, right?
Right, but he didn't speak directly to me or another manager. It's all right here on the counseling slip. I stated that he needed to call and speak to a manager, so as far as I'm concerned, that's a no call.
This panel's next witness is Lisa, the hostess. George said she took the phone call from Bob. Here's her story.
Okay, Lisa, why don't you tell everyone what happened?
Bob called at about 8 o'clock, and I answered the phone. He told me to tell the manager that he had been arrested. I told him he should talk to George himself, but he didn't want to. Said he didn't have time. I had a lobby full of guests waiting, and I didn't have time to tell George myself, so I wrote it down on a piece of paper. But I guess I forgot to give it to him until the end of my shift.
Lisa, what time did you remember to give George the message?
I clocked out at about 9:30.
What are you supposed to do if you can't make it in for your shift?
George is pretty strict about it. You are supposed to call in, and even when it is busy, you do have to talk to a manager.
How do you know this?
Everybody knows. He told us at a store meeting he had when he first got here.
Have you seen or talked to Bob since the night he called in?
No, but I did see him out later that night around 11.
The panel has asked to speak to Jimmy, a line cook. Bob mentioned he was supposed to pick Jimmy up to give him a ride to work the night he got in the accident.
Well, Bob was supposed to pick me up at 5:30 to go to work that night. I don't take rides from him too often. I mean, he's a good guy and all, but he's one of those people who's always late for everything. I wasn't worried when he was a few minutes late that night, but then he calls me up and tells me he's been in an accident. Well, I called work right away and told him that I would be a few minutes late, and then I called a cab.
Did you tell a manager about Bob?
Well, no, I figured he'd call in right away.
What made you think that?
Well, I assumed since he had called me that he would call the restaurant.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
Well, Bob's a pretty good guy, and he likes tending bar, and he's good at it too. But he said that George has been on his case ever since he took over as GM 6 months ago. He told me that George was just waiting for him to slip up.
Lisa gave him the message.
Can I see the counseling slip?
Sure. I mean, that Lisa should have gotten it to him right away.
Well, it says right here that if he called in late again, he would be fired. I think we need to speak to Bob again.
Is it signed by him? Both of them?
And he signed it.
So he understood that if he didn't
I
call in
don't
that he
think
wouldn't be
I
fired.
don't think he understood.
Yes,
I think
he
Would you
did.
like to speak to anyone else?
Is it possible to speak to Bob again?
We already talked to Bob.
That's okay. Any witness can be recalled. All it takes is for the panel to request one.
Well, let's talk to Bob again then.
Okay, I'll go get him.
Thank you.
Bob, what did George say when you called the restaurant?
Well, I didn't actually talk to George. I guess he was too busy. I left a message with Lisa, one of the hostesses. She was supposed to give the message to him.
Bob, what are you supposed to do when something comes up and you can't make it in for a shift?
You're supposed to call, which I did. I think I said it before.
Well, when you call in, are you supposed to talk with the manager?
That doesn't matter. I don't think that matters, does it?
Have you ever been told you're supposed to talk to a manager?
No, I don't remember that.
Why didn't you call Jimmy first?
I don't know. I guess Jimmy was on my mind. I was on my way to pick him up. So I called him. You know, it wasn't that late at the time, and it was just a little accident. It wasn't even my fault, and I didn't know I was going to get arrested.
You have heard all the witnesses. Now it's time to review all the facts. The panel will discuss the case. A good discussion will help each panelist make an informed decision. It's important to stay focused on the issue. In this case, Bob is asking for his job back, with back pay for lost wages.
I've read the appeal to you, you've reviewed the facts, now it's time to take a vote. As a panel, you can do one of three things. You can grant the appeal, which means Bob gets his job back with back pay. You can deny the appeal, which means the management decision is upheld. Or you can modify the appeal. But remember, whatever decision you make is final and binding. Once a decision is made, we'll notify Bob in writing of what that decision is. Remember to try to stay focused on the facts of the case and try not to let your personal feelings interfere. So why don't we start with modifications? Are there any?